Welcome back, brave souls, to another night of spine-tingling tales. Tonight we're diving into 5 haunting stories that will make you think twice before turning out the lights. From eerie attic encounters to unsettling strangers, these terrifying tales will chill you to the bone. But before we begin, hit that like button and subscribe if you dare. Now step into the shadows and prepare for the unknown. The footsteps that followed. 2016 was the last year I trick-or-treated. I was 15 and yeah, I was probably too old for it, but it felt like the last chance to do something carefree before real life started piling on. So, I planned the whole thing out. A sleepover with my best friends, Davis and Zach, the night before Halloween. We'd skip school the next day, roam the neighborhood collecting candy, and then finish it off with another sleepover. Just me and my girlfriend, Amber. It felt like the perfect plan. The night before Halloween, the 3 of us were in my basement. My parents had just renovated it, turning it into a full-on man cave. It had everything: an enormous TV, bean bags, a mini fridge packed with soda and snacks. But the one thing that always gave me chills was the hallway that led down to the basement. The light in the hallway had been broken for weeks, so you had to walk through this dark, narrow space before you reached the main room. It was like walking through a tunnel with the shadows feeling a little too thick, too heavy. We joked about it, calling it the Tunnel of Terror, but deep down, it creeped me out. We loaded up on pizza, chips, and candy, making the night about as perfect as a teenage sleepover could be. Around 11 p.m., we decided to binge on horror movies. First up was Scream, then we started Paranormal Activity for something more modern. I'll never forget what happened next. We were barely into Paranormal Activity right when things were starting to get tense, when the motion sensor light in the backyard suddenly flicked on, flooding the basement with bright light. It threw all of us off. "Probably just an animal," Zach muttered, but his voice was tight, unsure. We paused the movie, waiting for the light to go out. It felt like we were holding our breath, staring at the window, half expecting something to appear out there. But the light stayed on for what felt like forever, before finally shutting off, plunging us back into darkness. We hit play again, trying to shake off the weird moment, but I couldn't stop glancing at the window. I kept telling myself it was just a raccoon or a stray cat. But deep down, something felt wrong. It wasn't just the light. It was this strange, creeping feeling in my chest, like we weren't as alone as we thought. Things didn't get any better. Throughout the movie, I kept hearing these faint noises from upstairs. Just small thuds at first, like something shifting or falling over. I told myself it was just the house settling. It was an older house. But as the night went on, the sounds got louder, like footsteps moving slowly, deliberately, from one end of the house to the other. Davis finally asked, "Is someone upstairs?" "Nah," I said, trying to keep my voice casual. "It's probably just the wind or something." But I didn't believe that. None of us did. The rest of the night passed without anything major happening, but that uneasy feeling never left. I tried to shake it off the next day as we went trick-or-treating. It was me, Davis, and Zach, wearing half-assed costumes, strolling through the neighborhood with pillowcases, trying to relive the fun we used to have when we were younger. But something about the night didn't sit right with me. It felt like I was waiting for something to happen, like the weirdness from the night before was just the beginning. After trick-or-treating, Davis and Zach headed home, and Amber came over for what was supposed to be a low-key night. We snuggled up on the couch, watching another horror movie, laughing at the jump scares. But as the night crept on, those same sounds started up again. The footsteps. Amber noticed it too. She sat up, glancing toward the basement door. "Do you hear that?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. I nodded, my throat tightening. The footsteps weren't just upstairs. They were moving closer, slow and deliberate, as if whoever it was knew we were listening. I tried to play it cool. "It's probably just the house. Old house, weird noises, you know?" But my heart was racing. I stood up, grabbing the flashlight from my phone and shining it toward the stairs that led up to the main floor. The door at the top of the stairs was slightly open. I knew for a fact I had closed it earlier. I told Amber to stay put while I went to check it out. I crept up the stairs, my stomach twisting with every step. As I reached the top, I pushed the door open all the way. The hallway was dark, and the entire house felt unnaturally still. I did a quick sweep. Kitchen, living room, my parents' bedroom. Everything was exactly as it should have been, but that didn't make me feel any better. I went back downstairs, closing the door firmly behind me. Amber looked at me expectantly. "Nothing," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "It's fine." But the rest of the night was anything but fine. Every time I started to drift off, I'd hear it again. Those faint footsteps, like someone was walking back and forth just above the basement, right over our heads. I didn't get much sleep. Then, at about 3 a.m., I was jolted awake by the loudest sound yet. A definite thud right outside the basement door. Amber sat up, wide-eyed, and I could see she was just as scared as I was. The door, which I had just closed an hour ago, was open again. Wide open. I grabbed a baseball bat from the corner of the room, and together, we slowly crept upstairs. My mind was racing. Was someone messing with us? Or was it something else? Something I didn't want to believe. But when we reached the main floor, there was no one. No signs of a break-in. No evidence that anyone had been there at all. And yet, that door had opened by itself. The footsteps had been real. After that night, I didn't tell anyone what happened, not even my parents. They would have laughed it off, called it teenage paranoia, or blamed it on the Halloween atmosphere. But I knew what I'd heard, what I'd seen. The clown at the door. I was 16 that Halloween, and it was the first year I was trusted to stay home alone. My mom had to work late at the hospital, and my little brother Noah was sleeping over at a friend's house. I wasn't really into trick-or-treating anymore, and I figured a quiet night alone watching scary movies wouldn't be too bad. By the time it got dark, I had already handed out candy to the neighborhood kids. It was a slow night, just a few groups of kids, mostly little ones with their parents in tow. The candy bowl was still half full when I decided to head upstairs to my room. I turned off the porch light to signal that we were done for the night and figured that was the end of it. But I was wrong. It was around 10 p.m. when I first heard it, a loud thump coming from outside. At first, I thought it was just some kids playing around, maybe pulling a prank. I didn't think much of it until I heard it again. This time, it was closer, right outside the living room window. I muted the TV and listened, my heart starting to race. Another thump. I stood up and crept to the window, pulling the curtain aside just a crack. My stomach dropped when I saw what was out there. Standing in the yard, illuminated by the faint glow of the street lamp, was a man. He was wearing a clown mask, one of those cheap plastic ones with exaggerated features, painted on makeup, and a sinister grin. But what made it worse was that he wasn't just standing there. He was staring right at the house, motionless. I froze, my mind racing. Was this some kind of joke? A prank? It was Halloween, after all. But there was something about the way he stood so still, so focused, that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I backed away from the window, my heart pounding in my chest. Maybe it was just a neighbor trying to mess with me. Maybe if I ignored him, he'd go away. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. I waited a few minutes, hoping he'd disappear, but when I glanced out the window again, he was still there, closer this time. He had moved a few feet closer to the house, now standing just at the edge of the porch, staring at the front door. I grabbed my phone and texted my mom, trying to keep calm. "There's a guy in a clown mask outside. Should I call the police?" She didn't respond right away, and I felt a wave of panic building in my chest. I considered calling the police, but I didn't want to overreact. It was probably just a prank, right? But then came the knock. It was a slow, deliberate knock, 3 taps on the front door. My breath caught in my throat as I stared at the door from the living room. I hadn't turned off the hallway light, so if I moved, he'd be able to see my shadow through the window next to the door. I waited, holding my breath, hoping he'd leave, but the knocking came again. Louder this time, more insistent. I slowly crept toward the stairs, planning to go up to my room and lock the door. But halfway up, I heard the doorknob jiggle. My blood ran cold. He was trying to get in. I ran upstairs, my heart pounding so loudly I thought it might burst out of my chest. I locked my bedroom door and grabbed the baseball bat I kept in my closet. I was shaking so badly I could barely hold it. From my window, I could see the front yard. The clown was still standing by the door, but now he was looking up, right at my window. I ducked out of sight, my heart racing even faster. I could hear footsteps now, shuffling on the porch. He wasn't knocking anymore. It sounded like he was pacing back and forth, trying to figure out his next move. Suddenly, my phone buzzed. It was a text from my mom. "Call the police right now. Don't open the door." With shaking hands, I dialed 911 and whispered into the phone, explaining what was happening. The operator told me to stay calm and stay on the line. They were sending a car right away, but it would take a few minutes for them to get here. A few minutes felt like an eternity. I sat in my room, the bat clutched in my hands, listening to the sounds of footsteps below. I could hear him moving around the outside of the house, occasionally tapping on the windows, but never saying a word. I kept waiting for him to try breaking in, but he never did. Finally, after what felt like forever, I heard the distant sound of sirens. The footsteps stopped. I crept to the window and saw the police car pull up in front of the house, its lights flashing. But the clown was gone. The police checked the yard, the porch, and around the house. But they didn't find anyone. I told them what had happened, and they reassured me that it was probably just a prank. Someone trying to scare me because it was Halloween. They said they'd patrol the neighborhood for a while, just in case. After they left, I sat in the living room, staring at the front door. It didn't feel like a prank. The way he stood there, watching, waiting, there was something more to it. My mom came home a couple of hours later, and we double-checked all the doors and windows before going to bed. I didn't sleep that night. For days after, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every time I looked out the window, I half expected to see that clown standing there again, staring back at me. It's been a year now, and nothing like that has happened since. But every time Halloween comes around, I make sure to keep the doors locked and the porch light off. And I'll never forget the way he looked at me through that mask, like he knew something I didn't. The haunted invitation. In 2019, Halloween fell on a Thursday, and for the first time in years, my friends and I didn't have plans. It felt weird to be sitting around doing nothing on Halloween night. We had all the usual decorations up, pumpkins carved and flickering on the front porch, but no real parties or trick-or-treating to go to. Then, around 8 p.m., Jake, always the one to stir up trouble, sent a text. "Jake, guys, heard about this haunted house thing going down. You in?" I rolled my eyes. Jake loved this kind of stuff, but haunted houses were more for kids and thrill seekers. Still, I was bored. I glanced over at Emily, who was sitting beside me, scrolling through Instagram. "Jake wants to check out a haunted house," I said, expecting her to shoot it down. She surprised me. "Why not? It's Halloween." That was all it took. A few minutes later, we grabbed our coats, met up with Jake and his girlfriend Sarah, and piled into his car. As we drove through town, the streets were eerily quiet. Halloween had mostly passed us by, with trick-or-treaters already home and the night growing colder. We thought we were heading to some local haunted house attraction, but Jake hadn't told us everything. "Where exactly are we going?" Sarah asked, sounding skeptical as Jake took a turn down a narrow, dimly lit road that I hadn't even known existed. "You'll see," Jake said, flashing her a mischievous grin. "There's this old place. Supposedly it's haunted. Local legend. Thought we'd go see if it's the real deal." I shifted in my seat. "Wait, you're taking us to some real haunted house? Like an abandoned one?" Jake just smirked. "What's Halloween without a little adventure?" 10 minutes later, we pulled up to the place. It was a huge, decrepit Victorian mansion, sitting just beyond a pair of rusted iron gates. The house looked like it had been abandoned for decades. The windows were broken, the roof sagged, and the front yard was choked with overgrown weeds. A jack-o'-lantern, its face twisted into a sinister grin, sat on the front steps, flickering in the wind. "Creepy," Emily whispered, her breath misting in the cold air. "I told you it was legit," Jake said proudly, hopping out of the car. "They say no one's lived here in over 50 years. Some kind of murder-suicide happened back in the 60s. People around here call it the Harper House. The story goes the spirits invite you in, but they don't let you leave." "That's ridiculous," Sarah scoffed, but I could tell she was a little unnerved. I wasn't thrilled about breaking into some old, abandoned mansion, but curiosity got the better of me. It was Halloween, after all. If there was ever a time to explore a haunted house, this was it. The gate groaned as we pushed it open, and the four of us made our way up the crumbling path toward the house. The closer we got, the colder the air seemed to grow. There was something off about the place. It wasn't just the usual old spooky house vibes. It felt like the house was watching us. Jake tried the front door, and to my surprise, it creaked open easily. "After you," he said with a grin, holding it open for the rest of us. I hesitated for a second, but stepped inside, my flashlight cutting through the thick dust that hung in the air. The entryway was huge, with a grand staircase spiraling up to the second floor, its banister covered in cobwebs. Old tattered furniture sat in the corners, covered in dusty sheets. The house smelled of mold, old wood, and something else. Something metallic, like blood. We wandered through the darkened halls, our flashlights flickering as if the house was playing tricks on the batteries. The floor creaked under our feet, and every step echoed in the cavernous, empty rooms. "This place is creepy as hell," Emily whispered, clutching my arm. "Yeah, it is," I admitted, my heart racing as I caught a glimpse of something moving in the corner of my eye. But when I turned, there was nothing there. We explored room after room, finding nothing but old furniture and peeling wallpaper, until we reached a door at the end of the hallway. Unlike the rest of the house, this door was pristine. Polished wood, shining brass handle, and not a speck of dust. Jake didn't even hesitate. He grabbed the handle and pushed it open. Inside was a perfectly preserved dining room lit by a dozen flickering candles. A long table was set with old-fashioned china, and sitting at the head of the table was a man. At first I thought it was some kind of mannequin, but then his head turned slowly toward us. His face was pale, eyes sunken, and his skin looked waxy, almost like it had been preserved. He smiled, a slow, eerie grin that sent chills down my spine. "Welcome," he said in a raspy voice that echoed unnaturally through the room. We all froze, too stunned to move or speak. My breath caught in my throat as I realized what we were looking at wasn't human. "Please join us for dinner," the man said, gesturing to the empty seats around the table. Jake took a step forward as if in a trance. "Jake, no," I hissed, grabbing his arm, but he shook me off, eyes glazed over. Before I could stop him, he sat down at the table. And as soon as he did, the candles flared up, burning brighter, casting the room in a warm, eerie glow. "Come, sit," the man said again, looking at the rest of us. Emily and Sarah took a step back, but I could feel something pulling at me, tugging me toward the table. "Let's go," Emily whispered urgently. "We need to leave." I shouted, but he stayed still like he was rooted to the chair. The man at the head of the table smiled wider, his teeth sharp and yellow. "You've been invited," he said softly, "and no one leaves until the meal is finished." Without warning, the door behind us slammed shut. The air grew colder and the walls seemed to close in around us. The house creaked and groaned as if it were alive. I grabbed Emily's hand and backed away, but it was like the house itself wouldn't let us go. Jake's head suddenly snapped toward us, his eyes blank and lifeless. "Stay," he whispered, his voice no longer his own. I yanked Emily toward the door, panic flooding my veins. "We're leaving!" But as we reached the door, it wouldn't budge. We were trapped. Then, Without warning, the candles blew out, plunging us into darkness. The only sound was the faint rustle of fabric, like something moving through the room. My heart pounded in my ears as I fumbled for the doorknob, praying it would open. It did. We bolted out of the room, not daring to look back, and ran down the hallway toward the front door. The air felt heavier, colder, and the shadows seemed to twist and writhe, reaching out for us. We burst through the front door, gasping for breath as we stumbled outside. The night air hit us like a slap, and we didn't stop running until we reached the car. Jake and Sarah never came out. We called the police, but when they went inside, there was no dining room, no man at the table, just an empty, rotting house. I never told anyone else what really happened that night. No one would have believed me. The skeleton in the closet. I'll never forget the Halloween party I threw when I was 18. My parents were out of town for the weekend, and it felt like the perfect chance to host something epic at their house. It wasn't a huge party, just about 40 people, mostly close friends and a few friends of friends. I had made it clear that no randoms were allowed, though. It was strictly invite only, and I was dead set on keeping things under control. The one rule my parents drilled into my head was that I had to leave the house cleaner than they left it. That seemed easy enough at the time. The night kicked off perfectly. My buddy Kyle brought his DJ setup, and soon enough, the living room was packed with people dancing, laughing, and sipping on their drinks. It had that perfect party vibe. Everyone was chill, and the music was loud enough to drown out any complaints from neighbors who might catch wind of what was going on. About an hour or so in, I stepped out into the backyard to catch my breath. That's when my friend Alyssa came up to me looking a little confused. "Hey, who's the guy in the skeleton suit?" she asked. I blinked at her. "Skeleton suit?" "Yeah, full body head to toe. He's been walking around inside, and I swear I don't recognize him." That threw me off. I'd made it a point to know who was coming, and no one had mentioned a skeleton costume. Feeling a bit uneasy, I went back into the house to check it out. Inside, I started asking around. Nobody knew who this skeleton guy was. "He's been upstairs," someone mentioned, and my stomach twisted. The upstairs was supposed to be off limits. It was where my parents' bedroom was, and I definitely didn't want people up there messing with their stuff. I finally spotted the guy at the top of the stairs, coming down slowly. He was wearing a full skeleton bodysuit, the kind that covers everything, including his face. He had gloves on too, so no skin was showing. I approached him, trying to keep things cool. "Hey man," I said, trying to sound casual. "Who are you?" He stopped halfway down the stairs and tilted his head slightly like he was confused. After a long pause, he said in this deep, almost unnatural voice, "Mike, I was just using the bathroom upstairs." "Mike, huh? Who invited you?" I asked, trying to keep the edge out of my voice. He didn't answer. Instead, he just stared at me through the eye holes of the mask. I could feel something wasn't right. His presence was unsettling. I asked him to take off the mask, but he ignored me, brushing past like I wasn't even there. He walked straight out the front door. No one stopped him. I followed after him for a second, but he was gone by the time I stepped outside. Vanished into the night like he hadn't even been there in the first place. My mind was racing. Who the hell was he? How did he know about the party? Something about it was just wrong. So I ran back inside and went upstairs, half expecting to find something trashed or stolen. I checked every room, but nothing looked out of place. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I headed back outside and told my friends what had happened. Nobody had any clue who Mike was. The party went on, but the whole thing left me feeling uneasy. Even after everyone left and it was just me and my buddy Vinny cleaning up, I couldn't stop thinking about the guy in the skeleton suit. Around 2 a.m., after most people had gone home and the house was almost back to normal, I finally started to relax. I was exhausted, so I went upstairs to get ready for bed. I remember standing in the hallway, the house eerily quiet after hours of music and laughter. But then, from somewhere down the hall, I heard something. Faint shuffling, like someone moving around. My heart dropped. The noise was coming from my parents' bedroom. I tiptoed over to the door, and through the small crack I could see the light from the street lamp outside filtering into the room. And standing there by my parents' closet was the same guy, the skeleton suit guy, facing away from me. I froze, every instinct screaming at me to get out of there. Slowly I backed away, careful not to make a sound. I ran downstairs and grabbed Vinny. "Call 911, I whispered, my voice shaking. "He's still here." Vinny's face went pale, but he quickly pulled out his phone and made the call while I stood by the front door, eyes glued to the stairs. It felt like hours, but in reality, it was only a few minutes before I heard footsteps from above. The guy had to have heard us talking because by the time I went back to check, the bedroom window was wide open. He'd climbed out and disappeared into the night again, leaving behind a room that looked almost untouched. Almost. Except for the closet door, which was now wide open. Inside, where my dad's safe used to be, was nothing but an empty space. The cops arrived shortly after, but by then it was too late. The guy was long gone, and none of us had any idea who he was or how he even knew about the safe. We never figured it out. My parents were furious when they came back, but all I could tell them was the truth. I didn't know who the guy was, how he got in, or how he knew to go straight for the safe. That was the last party I ever threw at my parents' house. Whispers in the attic. I never expected that Halloween would bring me anything other than the usual pranks, costumes, and candy. But that night, it brought something else. Something I'll never forget. It started when my girlfriend, Emma, convinced me to help her move some old boxes from her grandparents' attic. She'd inherited the house after they passed, and we were slowly working through their things. The attic had always creeped me out. Even when we were kids, Emma would tell me ghost stories about the place, but I was too old to be afraid of dusty old houses, right? We went up there around dusk, the light filtering through the tiny window, casting long shadows across the room. I remember the musty smell of old wood and moth-eaten furniture. The floor creaked with every step, like the house itself was groaning under the weight of all those years. Emma handed me a flashlight since the single bulb up there was long burned out. As I moved deeper into the attic, I noticed a faint scratching sound coming from the far corner, where the old trunks and broken furniture were piled up. At first, I thought it was just mice. The house was old enough that rodents were probably all over the place. "Did you hear that?" I asked Emma, but she was too busy shifting through some old photo albums to notice. As I moved closer to the corner, the scratching got louder. Something about it was off. It wasn't the rapid scurry of a mouse or the low creak of the house settling. It was more deliberate, like someone or something was dragging their nails against the wood. My stomach tightened, but I brushed it off. Old houses made weird noises, and I wasn't about to let some creepy sound get to me. I was about to turn back when I saw it. The wooden chest, the one Emma's grandfather had always kept locked, had been moved. There were marks on the floor like it had been dragged, leaving long grooves in the dust. The strange part was neither Emma nor I had touched it, and it wasn't like anyone else had been up there. I shined the flashlight over it and my breath caught in my throat. The lid was slightly ajar. Emma had told me stories about that chest, how her grandfather never let anyone look inside. She said it was cursed, but I never believed her. Until now. I hesitated for a moment before calling out, "Hey, Em, did you mess with this chest?" She turned, her face pale. "No. Why?" "It's open," I said, pointing. Emma's eyes went wide. "It's never been open." Ignoring the pit forming in my stomach, I knelt down and opened the lid all the way. Inside, there was nothing but old blankets and sheets, but beneath them I felt something solid. I reached in and pulled out a small, dusty wooden box. It was locked, and something about it felt wrong in my hands. Too heavy for its size, like it was holding something it shouldn't. I could see the hesitation on Emma's face, but I had to know what was inside. I grabbed a nearby screwdriver and pried the lock open. As soon as the lid popped, the temperature in the room dropped, and a cold draft swept through the attic. Inside the box was a single, crumpled piece of paper. It looked like an old letter. The handwriting was faded, barely legible, but I could make out the words. It was a warning, written by someone named Elias. It mentioned something about the attic, about how they lived up there and couldn't be disturbed. My heart was racing now. Emma leaned over my shoulder, reading it too, her face growing paler by the second. "What is this?" she whispered. "I don't know." "But we should leave," I said, stuffing the letter back into the box. But as soon as I stood up, the scratching sound returned, this time from directly above us. My flashlight flickered, casting strange shadows across the attic, and I could swear I saw movement in the dark corners of the room. Emma grabbed my arm, her grip tight. "We need to go," she said, her voice trembling. But before we could move, the chest slammed shut with a deafening bang. The attic door swung shut behind us, and we were plunged into darkness. The scratching grew louder, more frantic, as if whatever was up there with us was getting closer. I could feel Emma trembling beside me, and all I could think was that we needed to get out of there, fast. With the flashlight barely holding on, I fumbled for the attic door, but it wouldn't budge. The cold air was wrapping around us, and the scratching had turned into something else. A faint whispering, as if a dozen voices were murmuring just out of earshot. That's when I saw it. Out of the corner of my eye, in the farthest corner of the attic, something moved. A shadow, tall and hunched, shifting toward us. My pulse raced as I yanked at the door, desperate to get out. Finally, the door gave way and we stumbled down the stairs, slamming it shut behind us. We didn't stop running until we were outside, gasping for breath on the front lawn. The house loomed behind us, silent and still, but I knew whatever was in that attic wasn't gone. Not yet. Emma never talked about what happened that night. We agreed not to go back up there, but sometimes when the house is quiet and the wind is still, I swear I can still hear the scratching. Thanks for joining us in the shadows tonight, where the line between the real and the supernatural blurs. If you enjoyed these haunting tales, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more terrifying stories. And remember, the darkness is always closer than you think. Until next time, sleep with one eye open. Good night, and stay safe.